It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. The podcast where we are going through every episode of Babylon 5 and its spin-off Crusade, as well as the tie-in movies, typically 30 years after the original broadcast. And we, as myself, Blaine Dowler, and my ever-present co-host, Jon Wilson. How you doing, Jon?
I am doing well, Blaine. Ready here to talk about The War Prayer, our episode for the week, which is a pretty interesting one.
Yes. Okay, it is. Glad you're doing well. I hope I make it through the whole thing. My feet are kind of sore. I think my shoes might be a little too tight. But we'll get through today.
I am not wearing shoes, and I never learned how to dance. So, I'm ready whatever comes.
All right. So The War Prayer originally aired March 9th, 1994. This is the fourth of 6 episodes to be directed by Richard Compton. Previously directed The Gathering, Minute on the Firing Line, and Infection, and he's got 2 other episodes that we will cover by the end of Season 1. I think more notably is that this is the first of 3 episodes written by D.C. Fontana.
Dorothy!
Yes, so she is known for her work largely on Star Trek because she broke into the industry working as Gene Roddenberry's assistant. Those who were involved in the behind-the-scenes production and mechanisms of the original Star Trek series largely credit her with pretty much everything we know about Spock and Vulcan culture, which is evidenced when she took over as showrunner on Star Trek the Animated Series with that revival, because Gene wasn't really hand-on. Apparently Gene was not a huge fan of animation. He just liked the animated series for the sake that it could prove there was still a market for Star Trek, as he kept pushing for the Phase 2 live action or a jump to the movies. So D.C. Fontana really was the showrunner on that animated series and wrote Yesteryear about young Spock, which is very frequently regarded as the best episode of that animated series.
Honestly, just having watched the season a couple times, while I don't... That animated series is kind of a struggle to watch sometimes, but I feel like I could hand Yesteryear to a modern day fan and say, it's an old cartoon, but it's still really worth watching. And there aren't that many episodes of the animated series that I could say that about.
Yeah, there's a couple. The guys who did Listen to the Prophets went on to Toon Trek, which will have concluded by the time people hear this. And I was giving feedback on that. They've covered it well. The animated series typically has stronger scripts than production, just because of the studio went through.
That's probably a big difference, yeah. The scripting versus the actual production of the episodes. I can see that.
Yeah. Anyway, beyond Star Trek, Dorothy had writer credits on $6 Million Man, Land of the Lost, Kung Fu, The Streets of San Francisco, Logan's Run, The Waltons, Dallas, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which is a show we're not done talking about, War of the Worlds, Legend of Prince Valiant, and following Babylon 5, she would work on Lonesome Dove, Hypernauts, Captain Simeon and the Space Monkeys, Reboot, where she wrote the episode where no sprite has gone before. She worked on Earth Final Conflict. She wrote the Forever War episode of the Silver Surfer TV series. She worked on Beast Wars Transformers. Yeah, she was one of the greats, and when we lost her at age 80 in 2019, that was still too soon.
Yeah, definitely. And she goes by D.C. Fontana instead of Dorothy Fontana because writing in the 60s for science fiction, it was definitely a man's game. And so she just, didn't make it obvious that she was a woman, and that's how she got scripts sold, which is a technique that in some professions, women still find success with today. That if they use their first initial instead of their first name, they will get more articles sold.
Yeah, which is, it's a very unfortunate reality. But the episode itself, it has a few plot threads going. Now, this is one of the ones where, a lot of the outside ones, JMS would talk about how they could pitch their own ideas or they could go from a template that JMS had ready for them. In the total of 18 episodes that were not written by JMS in this series, 17 of them end up using the outlines that JMS had because the scripts or the pitches that the writers made were not approved. I bring that up because the only exception to that is a DC Fontana script that we will be covering down the road. So this is one that was largely JMS's pitch, or his outline, but his outlines would be one of the plots and not all of the plots. So we have a few plot threads going here. The primary one that I would call the A plot is that a group calling themselves the Home Guard, claiming to be pro-Earth who are really anti-alien, are responsible for attacking non-humanoids on Babylon 5, on Earth, and on Mars. And this episode starts when they attack the Minbari poet Shal Mayan, who is a close friend of Delenn. And this obviously is agitating virtually all of the aliens on the station. The only one who doesn't seem to care is Kosh. So this will dovetail directly into Ivanova's plotline, where an old flame of hers comes on the station saying it's been 8 years. She had left him to pursue a great career opportunity, and he came back saying, I've decided I would rather live with you knowing I come second to your work than live without you, and tries to rekindle that flame, which is going well because Ivanova was interested in him as well, until she finds out that he is one of the members of the Home Guard who's orchestrating a lot of these, and plans to simultaneously assassinate all 4 of the major alien ambassadors on Babylon 5 as a signal for assassinations to start on Earth. And Ivanova helps Sinclair infiltrate the group, claiming beliefs he doesn't actually have so that they would trust him to get deep enough to break them up, which is successful. So throughout this, like I said, all the non-humans are agitated. The most agitated is Jakar, who is almost charged with inciting a riot before he stands down. And while Londo and the other Centauris are not thrilled with it, they are a little more preoccupied by the fact that Fear's cousin Kiron and his girlfriend Arya have fled the Centauri homeworld because they don't want to be married to other people, and arranged marriages are part of it. They come to Babylon 5 because they thought that Kiran's cousin Vir Kodo was not assistant to the ambassador, but the actual ambassador, which gets cleared up very quickly once they arrive. And Londo at first says, no, tradition is what holds the Centauri together. Your parents made good choices. If he's old and ugly, then this person must be rich and powerful, so it would be a good fit. And, after talking to Shal Mayan, who survived her attack and branding and refused to have the brand removed, he realizes that, when he was young, he would have been on their side, and he has lost something. And so he finds loopholes in Centauri tradition that basically allow them to save face. They found something that might be of more social value to them than their arranged marriages, which is a fostership by a prominent Centauri family, namely one of his cousins. And then once that fostership is done, then they can choose to marry whomever they wish to marry. So that's kind of a happy ending for all. So I think those are about it. The only other involvement Kosh has, we find out that he's studying Earth, and there's a brief conversation between Sinclair and Ivanova where they start to wonder how in the gathering was he vulnerable enough to be poisoned because of that encounter suit, which is a scene that Fontana didn't actually write. It was originally written for Parliament of Dreams, which ran long, and Fontana's script ran short. So they did a little bit of ADR to clean it up and moved it here.
It's interesting because it really doesn't feed into either story directly, but when it's said, it comes off of a conversation that is relevant to the plot of the episode. It feels like it's going to feed back into the episode at the time, but then it just doesn't. So it really is just one of those. This fits into the overall series, probably, I'm saying, not having seen it all, but it doesn't actually apply to the episode.
Yeah, that's a question that will be answered.
Yeah. So, yeah, what were you thinking on this one?
This one, I remember I've only seen this on DVD or now, so I didn't see it in broadcast. So I didn't have the same reaction audiences had at first for reasons we can get into. But for the most part, I enjoyed it. I found it was working. It's interesting to compare it to the script because when the script was written, it didn't appear as though Andreas Katsoulis was going to be available. So Jakar was not a part of the script here. So this one went under some fairly heavy rewriting by JMS because when DC Fontana pitched it, she was in LA. When she turned it in, she was just about, and worked on it, she was in New Zealand. So there's a lot of asynchronous phone calls and stuff. She was actually writing this script during a 2-week vacation with her husband, which says a lot about her work ethic as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time through, because I was watching on the season 1 DVD, which didn't actually include The Gathering, I thought it was kind of clunky with the conversation about Kosh and how he was poisoned. It felt like they were using this exposition to establish events that happened before the series that we didn't see. I didn't realize it was recapping a pilot movie that was missing on the DVD sets.
Okay. Yeah.
So had I even known that there was a pilot movie that was missing on the DVD sets, I think I would have reacted differently the first time. I would have said, oh, this probably would have been from there. And then put the pieces together. Because the first time through, without knowing I was missing something, that part just felt awkward. The only part that really rubbed me the wrong way this time, which I can kind of hand wave away, is that we learned in The Gathering that it was Laurel Takashima that had the coffee plant. And she was transferred off station. So that's the one time it seems like something that was for, character that was lost was grafted onto another character. I said I could hand wave it away because I can imagine that Takashima left notes for whoever her replacement would be that included, oh, and by the way, there's this coffee plant in hydroponics. And Ivanova went, ooh, coffee, and just ran with it.
Exactly. We can think of how that might have happened, but you're right. Babylon 5 makes it a point to not just copy and paste from one character to their recast counterpart. Other than a similar role in the show, the characters themselves are very different. And this is one of those exceptions to the rule. Maybe an exception that proves the rule. I don't know. But yeah, hearing them bring up the coffee pods, I was like, oh, wait, I thought Takashima had those. And, but no, she does like her coffee. And she's like, you're a very cruel man.
Mm-hmm. Which that was part of the rewriting because Fontana admits she hadn't quite figured out Garibaldi's voice yet.
Right.
So a lot of his dialogue was rewritten too. She did say it was a very positive experience overall. So,
oh, good, because that's not always the case. I did like their interactions. I'm really fond of when Garibaldi and Ivanova, when they sort of spar on screen, because there is a friendship, there is a professional respect there, but also they're both very committed to their jobs, and it's also a little bit of a professional rivalry because their interests. I mean, they both have the best interests of the ship at heart. But in this particular case, it was kind of a pure self-interest thing that was
mm-hmm.
getting in the way. Neither one of them wanted to get off their butts and go take care of the thing. And he's like, you really should go do this. I don't want to go do this, and I'm going to threaten you to make sure you go do it.
Yep. I don't like what you're right. She says, you're a vicious man. And he's like, well, chief of security, it's part of the job description.
Good stuff.
Which segs into his interrogation where he was a vicious man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Danica McKellar is in this. And I don't know, I can't remember if you mentioned her in the ident card at the beginning. She had just come off of her, 5-year, 6-year stint on The Wonder Years. This is her first credit after that. She still seems so young. But, of course, I grew up watching The Wonder Years, and when I saw her in this episode, I was like, oh, that's her. She is one of my few young TV watch crushes that I've actually met in real life. I got to meet her at San Diego Comic-Con one year because she does the voice for Megan on Young Justice. And I went to San Diego in 2011 during their first season, and she was doing some publicity because there was the romance between her and Superboy was still in its formative stages, and so the fact that they were going to have a kiss was kind of news, and she was there. So got to meet Danica McKellar, and that was pretty great. Outside of acting, she is also a math education expert. Like, she writes books about understanding and teaching mathematics to kids. And it's one of those things where you see an actress or an actor and you find out they are also very accomplished in an entirely unrelated field. It's like, oh, wow. And since I also like math, it's like, oh, she's really good at math too. That's fantastic. So, yeah.
Yeah, she actually has a PhD in mathematics, and her books are quite good. I bought 3 or 4 of them for my oldest niece a few years ago.
That's great.
So, yeah, she's the real deal. Like, huge, like you said, promoter of math education, especially for girls. A lot of it is, let's make the problems relevant, which is an issue I have. Just pulling back the curtain, in our day jobs, John and I are both math teachers. Different levels, different regions, but we both teach math. And one of my pet peeves is they say, it's a real world problem. I'm like, no. You're using real world things. But your real world problem for rates, nobody figures out how fast they're going by mentally counting the number of seconds between when they pass 2 light posts and knowing how far apart the light posts are. You check your speed up.
Right. In your recap, you use the phrase, they're pro-Earth, when really they're just anti-alien. Or they say they're pro-Earth when really they're just anti-alien or something like that. And I really appreciated that, because that kind of language still very much exists today. And it is the difference between, in my mind, the difference between something akin to patriotism versus jingoism. Where it's like, you say America first, you say pro-Earth, but you don't really mean that. You just mean anti everything that's not this little particular thing that you like. And that's definitely what's going on here.
Yes. Yeah, that part rings especially true. Now, I mean, JMS is working on a relaunch for Babylon 5, which has probably made it to the air by the time you guys are hearing this. At least the pilot will be done. And yeah, he says it's going to be ground up redesign with some common characters, but mostly exploring the themes that are relevant today. Sadly, this is one of those themes that he could use in both versions.
Yeah. And it's not even metaphor. Like, a lot of times science fiction will use metaphor to talk about things like racism and bigotry and class divisions, that sort of thing. But this is just like, no, the stuff that we have to deal with on Earth in 1994 or in 2024 is just still prevalent in whatever year this takes place. Well, they say it every episode, and I can't think off the top of my head, 2256 or something. When is this set?
Or 2258, but
2250. I was close.
Something like that. I can actually pull out the timeline and find out, probably down to the month and day.
Just the point being that, like, this particular problem with humanity is still going to be a problem then, which, again, we tend to do this, sets it different from Star Trek. And not to say that either one is better or worse, but just to talk about the difference. I think that stuff like bigotry, which expresses itself through racism and through sexism and that sort of thing, that is dealing with problems in the roots of the human psyche. And I'm not entirely sure how successful will be at ever getting rid of that as a concept. It might express itself differently through the decades or through the centuries, but I think bigotry is just always going to be a human problem. And to say it's still a human problem in 2258 is something I can get behind, instead of just polishing all of humanity and saying they're all nice.
Yeah. Reading the posts that JMS made in Genie, there's the Asked and Answered series of books, where they went through 18,000 of his old posts, which have been archived on jmsnews.com, and they selected about 5,300 to collect and organize. The argument he makes for it is very, very strong, which is, we are looking at a future 200 years from now, and today's patterns of behavior have been patterns of behavior for 5,000 years. Why would we expect them to be solved in 200 when we've been trying unsuccessfully to solve them for 5,000?
Right. And there definitely is a place for human utopia-based storytelling. I'm not knocking that. I just say that I also like this approach.
Yeah, it's nice, and I mean, I would love if we have a utopia, but I think the biggest obstacle to achieving utopia is getting everyone to agree on what utopia looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a challenge. I mean, if we go back to the actual Thomas More's original source, Utopia, and read it, it would not be considered utopia by the people who are slaves in that book. It's utopia for one class of people only, not the entire society.
Yeah.
That slavery is more like indentured servitude, but still, it's not utopia for everyone.
Right. So, getting to another kind of bigotry that might be a metaphor, and this is something that I'm curious to see how if I'm doing a viewer interpretation or if this is a subtext that was intended in the scripting. So, the opening scene is a conversation between Delenn and Mayan, and they are very friendly. They are very affectionate. And the way that they talk about the history of their relationship, it feels very much like they're remembering an old romance. And so whenever Mayan immediately gets assaulted in the hallway, that feels like a metaphor for a very specific kind of hate crime. And then they stamp a symbol on her forehead that only reinforces that, because it basically looks like the female symbol.
That's an element of that. I think I would not be surprised if, when JMS conceived this pitch that he gave to Fontana, if that pitch was old enough that Delenn was still male in his mind at this point.
Okay.
So then that would, again, reinforce the romance. Here they're clearly very, very close.
Well, whether she's male or not, the romance could be there. And the fact that at this point in the setting of the story, she's presenting female makes it a hate crime.
Yeah, this is going to be a hate crime. For the notes I've read, there's no mention that subtext was something anyone had in mind. Most of the comments they have now are because of the complete coincidence of the fact that this episode was finished in the canon unaired when Deep Space Nine aired an episode where a bunch of racist people on Bajor attacked and branded Quark in their anti-Federation nationalist movement.
Yes, that did come out a few weeks before this, yeah.
Yeah, and JMS was very clear online. He says, no, this is one of those ones that is pure coincidence. We had no idea that they were writing it, and our episode was done, locked, and in the can when theirs dropped. So they must have been working on this long enough. Like he says that there was no conceivable way for them to know it. It was just something that they did, and the fact that they did the forehead branding in both was a coincidence.
Well, in my mind, Delenn and Mayan are old lesbians, and they are having a nice little reunion here that could have had a very pleasant evening, except they both had to get up the next morning, and so they couldn't stay up together. But that's going to be my read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said, I have seen nothing that says that was the intent, but I am also unaware of anything that says that is excluded.
So going back to Ivanova, because I really liked Claudia Christian's performance in this, and one of the things I like about her is, and I may have said this before, the way she presents a dichotomy in her character. She is no nonsense when she's on duty, and her duty and her career are very important to her. But when she's off, when she is not devoting her mind to her job, she allows her personal aspect to come out. She as an actor, she emotes more, allows the character's personality to come through, and I just think that's a good job on the part of the actress, and we see that here explicitly in scenes like whenever she and the guy's name that's escaping me because it's not on my screen right now, but whenever they're talking and they get a call, Malcolm, when she and Malcolm are talking and they get a call, they're going from romance, thinking about what pleasant aspects of the evening may be ahead of them, to dealing with violence on the station. And she flips. Not flips like goes crazy, but she flips from off-duty to on-duty mode.
Yeah, it's more like flipping a switch than freaking out. She's just, okay,
Yeah.
the job is on, and now it's work, Ivanova. And Malcolm is basically there going, really? She's like, yeah, really, it's duty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the implied line that didn't come out of her mouth was, you just told me you understood this.
And just on the topic of her performance, whenever she and Malcolm are on the date, she's enjoying their time together. The sort of context is she really did not expect to see him show up. And he is obviously wanting to kind of pick up where they left off, and she's sort of wanting to take it slow. So they're on this date, and he's like, I'm going to be living on the station. And you can tell that, at least at first, there is a little bit of uncertainty and discomfort with her whenever he says that. It's just, she's got one of those like, okay, kind of smiles on her face, like she has to process this. I'm not saying that she's opposed to the idea at this point, just that it catches her off guard and the actress lets it come through very subtly, and I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. She does a lot of subtle work here, especially when she and Sinclair are pretending to feel a different way about the aliens just to set up the sting. And the look on her face when they show her the evidence where, Malcolm came in and visited a human who was attacked in a retaliatory attack in Medbay and said, hey, you know what? You've got friends. And Sinclair goes, oh, I've seen this guy. He was in Ivanova's quarters. And then when they bring her in, just the look on her face from that point on. And you could see her playing it when Malcolm can see Ivanova's face. There's no hint of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But when Malcolm cannot see her face, you could tell that she is restraining herself from bashing his skull in because she knows that they need him to catch the bigger fish and find out how deep this runs.
Yeah. And her discuss with him at the end, he says, I don't know you anymore. She's like, I never knew you. If I had known that this was a part of who you were, us would never have happened. That's the idea that you get there.
Yeah, she is not and never has been okay with this, even though she does make a point of saying, that was 8 years ago, a different me.
Mm-hmm.
So something has changed with Ivanova in the past 8 years. Just to tip a little bit to giving form to the dream while we're in that general area.
We mentioned Kosh. He's in this episode. He's less talkative than he was when he showed up a few episodes back. I was taking to heart the comment you made that when he shows up, it's intended and specifically written in. And also the fact that they talk about him as a specific development that's here. And I remember thinking about that question at some point as far as how he was poisoned through his impenetrable suit. But I don't think it was during this viewing. I think it was like an earlier viewing. Because I remember when they mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, I feel like I thought about that.
Yeah, and it is something that was shown a little bit in The Gathering when Lita was scanning his thoughts. She remembered, she said it would be her body. But in the memory that she saw, she extended her hand out of the encounter suit and got poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we saw through her eyes when she was seeing it through Kosh's whatever works for eyes. As they point out here, we don't know how much the encounter suit is just to hide what they look like.
Right. She had mentioned going into that vision that some of what she's going to see is going to be symbolic. So in the vision, when he basically gets a piece of red construction paper stuck to the back of his hand, I didn't think too much about it. I was like, oh, okay, that looks a little silly if this were actually happening, but I can see that as being symbolic of something bad happening, and that turns out to be poison in the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one of the things about that Kosh discussion that I really liked is both the doctor and the resident telepath characters have been recast since that pilot. But JMS worked the element of their recasting and the fact that those characters have gone off to do other things, he has now worked into the plot and worked into what might be feeding the background elements of the storyline. And that was smooth. I liked that.
Yeah, he said that was it was a very happy accident when he realized that the actors they were missing had this one thing in common, which fed so beautifully into what he already had planned.
Yeah.
So it set up an opportunity that they didn't realize they were going to have.
You mentioned Jakar almost wasn't in this episode because it didn't look like the actor was going to be available. We continue this idea that Jakar... Okay, let me re-say that sentence. In this episode, Jakar seems to go a bit more back to type as being the antagonist of the story. And yet, his antagonistic position, his oppositional attitude, is completely understandable throughout the episode. Is he overreacting a little bit? Well, from the perspective of the human characters, maybe they think so. But if you put yourself in his shoes, all the non-humans are being slowly killed off. And it seems like the humans aren't doing anything about it. And that's not cool.
Yeah. From his perspective, the police are the equivalent of the police, the security force, are not doing their jobs. And he has a right to be angry. So this is one of those cases where it's antagonistic. What he's doing is not necessarily in the best interests of Babylon 5, but it's not an irrational position.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely understandable anger coming from his perspective.
And then whenever the attack on Roberts, now I can't remember how much you brought out in the recap, but Roberts is a character. He's interesting because he definitely presents the more bigoted, more narrow-minded, humanity first, quote unquote, view of characters in this world. They chose to cast him as a person of color, which I think helped to reinforce the idea that 200 years have passed. And so who is expressing hateful ideas might not be the same crowd that you're used to expressing hateful ideas. It's not just all white people all the time. But where I was going with that is that whenever he's attacked, that attack is done by members of an unfamiliar species. So I think it helps keep the viewer from going to any unwarranted conclusions about what exactly is going on here.
Yeah, aside from the fact that they're going, oh, we hear that you're one who hunts. So they knew that he was brought in as a suspect, and they thought for some reason that, yeah, he was guilty but released anyway. That seems to be the motivation there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's JMS's attitude again on the forums, is that he doesn't see humans. He finds it hard to believe that racism will continue amongst humans once we've made this much contact with alien races.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that otherism that humans are prone to that leads to racism and classism and sexism, when you change the scope of the intelligent beings you're dealing with, well, now all of a sudden humans are a lot more alike than we realized.
Right.
So that otherism will most likely be directed at aliens rather than other humans. So that's sort of the attitude and mentality that comes into this.
We had a similar shift happen in America 100+ years ago. Other Caucasian European cultures would often get treated with bigotry by English-rooted or England-rooted or Anglophile, or not Anglophile, but, Anglic Caucasian people. So you have like the Italians in a city would be mistreated and that sort of thing. And a lot of that has faded. I'm not saying it's gone because I don't know what all is happening in all the different places of America. But certainly there is a shift to Caucasian people, white people being sort of a group, and then people of color being all these other groups. You don't have a whole lot of divisions within Caucasian peoples in America anymore. So the idea that 200 years from now, the divisions between humans maybe not have gone away, but have faded, and the hateful members of humanity have sort of united against a different, capital O, other group. That's something we've seen. So it's something that's reasonable to think could happen in the future.
Yeah, it's a position that I have to agree with. Not that we're going to grow out of racism, but that we will redirect it when we have a broader context.
Mm.
So it is something that we should work to overcome it, but it won't be an easy fix.
Self-examination, being aware of your biases, that kind of thing. It's always good stuff. Have we redone the infirmary set? Because we haven't spent a lot of time in there lately, and I was like, this feels different. Did you notice?
It's not a redone set. It is one of the hospitals, because when you have 250,000 people on the station, you'll have more than one facility.
That makes all of the sense. Just always being like, the infirmary, the med bay, the sick bay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it. And it's, people were asking, is that med bay really big enough? And his response was, no, you're going to see one of the hospitals in this other episode that we've already filmed. Just haven't aired yet.
Gotcha.
This was actually the 7th episode filmed and the 7th episode aired. Although some of the produced episodes at this point are still coming. So, again, it's being filmed out of order, but this is what that happened.
You mentioned timeline earlier, and just in the various Babylon 5, I've been trying not to research too much, but just, searching with this or that thing. So you not only have the production order and the release order, but you also have an internal timeline order that is different to the other two. And it was documented in some sort of book or something. I didn't look at the details. So yeah, the fact that this is 7th made and 7th aired is kind of a coincidence because all the other episodes around that have been shifted around.
One of the books that was released that I've been looking at, because they released a lot of books. There was a whole B5books.com, Babylon 5 Books was essentially a company to produce these. They have released, in the end, 16 volumes of JMS's scripts. So 15 for the series, plus one more for the movies. They have released the Asked and Answered, so 5 volumes that have over 5,000 questions that he answered on the news groups. They have released But in Purple I'm Stunning, which is just quotes. They have released Artifacts from Beyond the Rim, which are just random production memos and things like that. And there's also a chronology. So putting down all the points in the entire history of Babylon 5, when the episodes take place, and backstory. So if you were to read that, we would hit that the planet from Infection, where they found this 1,000-year-old combat technology, that would appear in the chronology 1,000 years prior. So they've got these. I've got all of those. I didn't get the 7-volume set, which is random interviews with other people from other sources, which is unfortunate because there would have been more there. And then there's a series on Crusade as well. So yes, one of them is a chronology. It's a good 250 to 300 pages. That is nothing but the timeline of Babylon 5.
And that has been onlineified. It's on what we used to call wiki pages, but are now fandom pages. So we haven't really talked a whole lot about the Londo plot in this. And there are just a couple of points that I picked up on it. One, the whole line that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, my shoes are too tight, but it doesn't matter because I have forgotten how to dance. That almost feels like it should be a line from Twin Peaks. Like it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And like it's really not hard to see the metaphor that he's going for there. But Veer is completely confused. I don't think Veer is really that bright.
It seems like at this point in his life, he was possibly even assigned to this. He's just been kind of going with the flow and doing what people ask and trying his best. But it doesn't seem like he has a lot of personal goals that he's worked towards or a lot of skills that have been developed to that end. So yeah, he's not used to interpreting subtext.
No, he's not. But I could just see the man from another place saying the line, my shoes are too tight, but I've forgotten how to dance. And he gets up and starts dancing backwards around the room. You do know Twin Peaks, right?
I have actually only seen the first 3 episodes. I need to go back to it.
Oh, dear. Yeah, it's a whole thing. If you do watch it, I can be your conversation person. The other thing I was thinking about it, I don't believe it's Delenn. I think it's Mayan, because Mayan has a lot of lines in this that you might normally expect Delenn to deliver, but they use the actress more. Londo is saying that Danica McKellar's character will learn to live without love. And Mayan says, as you did, which I think is a really nice line because just in the episode by itself, one can presume that Londo, having lived his life, may not actually be as happy with his, romantic life experiences as he would like to be. And so he's expecting these kids to have a source of something that was a source of unhappiness for him. But also, regular viewers know all about his storyline from back in Born to the Purple. And so he definitely has pursued romantic love. Learning to live without love is ridiculous, and he himself did not do it.
Yeah, some of that might be because one of the things that JMS liked to do to make the production easier, keep them on schedule, keep them on budget, is have scripts locked in months in advance. So, again, to compare it to Star Trek, a lot of directors on Star Trek will do one episode and leave and complain because the script they got on the Friday did not match the shooting script that were handed when they walked in the door Monday morning to actually start filming. And entire sets had to be scrubbed and replaced with brand new sets and things like that. So there's a lot of last minute changes in other shows. That's not the case in Babylon 5. So in this case, when Fontana started writing, she had been given the chance to watch The Gathering, and then they showed some of the dailies from Midnight on the Firing Line so that they could see how the new characters would fit in and who they were. And that's it. So at this point, The Gathering was the only film that was actually in the can when they made this. And since Born to the Purple was written by Larry DiTillio, right, I don't know how much access Fontana had to the contents of that episode. So that could be part of it, is just from what she saw on paper, that aspect of Londo was not known to her when she wrote this one. In which case, it's still potentially a continuity issue, but it's one that should go to Larry DiTillio at JMS as the story editor and the showrunner, more so than Fontana.
I wouldn't see it as a continuity issue. I would see it as just like sometimes older people expect younger people to do certain things a certain way, even though they themselves did not. And it's just one of those things about, raising kids and interactions between the generations.
Yeah, and it could also be the case that, given the way things played out in Born to the Purple, Londo may now be questioning whether or not that was actually love. From her, at least.
Yeah. I feel like they resolved it at the end, but, there's always questions in your mind that come up after the fact. And so he's living with that and not able to find a resolution with it. So yeah, he could be any number of places with that history. I had 2 more points. So Mila Shar is an alien character who is seen very briefly in 2 scenes whenever the commander is putting on his pretending to be a racist act and meeting people she is an alien that he shakes hands with and is a bit gruff with. And you can see Delenn is put off. They don't talk about it. They don't overdo the writing on it, but Delenn is definitely put off by how gruff Sinclair is being. And then later in the episode, whenever the Earth First people are asking Sinclair to prove it, they ask him to kill Mila Shar. I really liked her. I thought she was pretty great, but her design, like just the colors and the head ridge and everything, she felt a little bit like Captain Marvel whenever Captain Marvel was wearing the Mohawk helmet. And I just kind of got a kick out of that. Completely coincidental because that didn't exist then, but yeah.
Yeah, if it's not coincidental, it was Babylon 5 inspiring the Captain Marvel design and not vice versa, because that's the actual chronology. But yeah, I agree, it's probably coincidental. But yeah, I liked her too. I guess they like the actress because this is the first of 3 different roles she will play on Babylon 5.
Okay.
In 3 different species.
And that's Diane Adair.
Yes, Diane Adair will return to play 2 other characters from, as I said, 2 other species.
And if you've seen her in other things, it's been just random TV appearances. She never had a regular role. She's never been a star in a film. She's just been an actress who's shown up in stuff from 1981 until 2018, but with lots of large gaps in between appearances. So this episode is not rated very highly on MDib, which I didn't really care. I don't really care about. I don't really look at this from episode to episode. I was just curious about this one. And true, some of it feels a little trite. I'm not entirely sure how well the romance story gets played, just because of the actors being younger. But overall, I really, really liked this. My only complaint about the episode is that the plot at the end, whenever the Home Guard go to Sinclair and Ivanova, I feel like Malcolm decides to trust that just a bit too easily. Like, Sinclair is the commander of this station. He's been working with different alien races and building bridges and creating diplomacy for a couple of years now. And they're able to convince Malcolm that he's actually a secret bigot the entire time. I can rationalize it in my brain, but it did feel a little bit too easy.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, because it was really just, one day, and even after he'd had that, he might be thinking that there was something recorded. I think it probably would have been a better fit for Ivanova to be the one because he would want to think that she's on his side because of the relationship. It would have been easier for her to convince him, I think. Yeah, so I think it would have been easier had she been the inside person, because the executive officer of Babylon 5 is still fairly high. She still could have accomplished what they needed her for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, given that their main plan was 4 days from there, what was their plan without the inside support to get out?
Right. There is that. And part of my rationalization is that it's Malcolm's trust of Ivanova that whenever she says off screen, we assume, you can trust Sinclair, or whenever she's the one that sort of, leads Malcolm to meet Sinclair, and that he is seeing Sinclair through his filter of Ivanova.
Yeah, I think we can clear a lot of this up if we just assume that she set this up when she was talking to him. Because Sinclair said, yeah, set up the meet. So whatever she said to him, setting up the meet, was most of it. And then what he saw from Sinclair was just reinforcing what he already wanted to believe that Ivanova had told him.
But yeah, the war prayer, that's everything I had. Do you have any other thoughts on it?
No, I think we've covered it for League in Session. So next is our last best hopes for the standout character or character moment.
All right, so for this, I'm going to give it to just Claudia Christian's performance as Ivanova in this. She continues to be impressive, and that really got to be highlighted in this. I really like her as a performer, and I like the character.
That was a serious contender for me. So if you're taking that one just to give all the credit where credit is due, I'm going to tip to my other choice that I was debating between, which is the moment at the end where Londo reveals the plan and what he has arranged, saying that, okay, here's how we're going to circumvent this whole arranged marriage thing and let you guys marry each other while still saving face.
Mm-hmm.
And when they describe it all, not just because of what it shows for Londo, but when Veer says, oh yeah, it's old, but it's still in the books, and Londo's going, oh, you've been studying. So it's establishing something new for Veer, because as we've said, we haven't seen a lot of competence from Veer up to this point. So the fact that he was aware of that is really the first piece of that.
Okay. Yeah, and it actually took a couple of viewings for me to figure out exactly, because, Londo's presenting a lot of ideas that are culturally unfamiliar to us in order to justify what's going to happen with this storyline. So it's a bit of an info dump, but also information that is not easily familiar. So it took me a couple of watchings to figure out exactly what was going on with that and how that was going to be resolved. But the fact that he turned around and was able to do that for them, and yeah, it gives a little attaboy to Veer along the way. I like that as well. So that takes us to giving form to the dream. Now, other than the progress of the anti-alien sentiments on Earth, which are mentioned in the context of what's going on back on Earth, if only briefly, during the course of this episode. So we are seeing these events as one bubble in the context of a larger human versus alien bigotry landscape. And I'm sure that's not done yet. That's going to keep on going. We have 4.5 more seasons.
Yeah, this is not our last encounter with Home Guard. That's definitely part of giving form to the dream. So that is in there. We also have the tidbit that Ivanova said where she is a different person than she was 8 years ago. We have Ivanova and Sinclair questioning how Kosh could have been poisoned through the encounter suit and what got through, how they got through that. And we have Ivanova pointing out that we don't know enough of the Vorlons to know how much of that encounter suit is actually biologically necessary and how much is just because Vorlons don't want anyone to know what they look like. So these are all things that may come back, as well as another piece that we have here is that, again, Londo really wants to support Centauri traditions. So even when he helped these kids marry who they wanted to and who they loved, it's through the use of traditions, right? So he just found a way to do it within the rules to harken back to what he considers the heyday of the Centauri.
And it's using, less commonly practiced traditions, but it's still rooted in the idea of tradition, which is what gives it weight. And yeah, I like that. So when Ivanova said that about being a different person 8 years ago, that, that's one of those lines that people can just say, I'm not the same person I was 8 years ago. I personally, John Wilson, am not the person I was 8 years ago. I'd like to think I've grown as an individual. But the fact that there are some specific backstories, elements that are going to get developed there, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, shall we move on to our comm link? And
Yeah, we've got next episode will be the last one that I've seen before, which would be and a Sky Full of Stars. That's whenever we started the show, I said that I had seen the first season. Turns out I had only seen the first half of the first season, and I have not watched anything past that. So once we get 2 more episodes down the row, which is not going to be 2 weeks because of a little broadcast gap after next week. But once we get past that, I will have not seen any of this until we get to it for the podcast.
yes, and this, I know you don't put a huge amount of value in the IMDb ratings, nor do I, especially depending on which era, because you will have people stuffing ballots for or against. But just to comment, next week's episode will be the highest rated to date of the episodes that we'll have covered.
Very cool. It's less I don't put a lot of weight in them. It's that I don't allow them to influence my opinion on stuff. And I don't want to go into an episode knowing, oh, this is one people hate. I really, really don't like to have negative influences on something when I'm going into it for the first time. So I don't really look at those points a whole lot. And if I do, it's usually only after the fact.
Yeah, I can see that. And with Babylon 5 in particular, I would say, as we're coming up, there's times where you don't want to look at the IMDb until after the fact. When those come up, I will let you and our listeners know at this point. So if there was something in the And the Sky Full of Stars IMDb that you should not be looking at until after you've seen it, I would be saying that now, so that we would know to stay away to avoid spoilers until after we've watched it for the next week.
Alrighty.
So in the meantime, we did mention we've got a production gap or a broadcast gap coming up. And one of the ways that we're going to fill those broadcast gaps is with feedback episodes, where we're asking our listeners to give us feedback that will be read on the air. In order to do that, you have to send us that feedback. One way to do that is with email, Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com. Will get to us, whether you use numerals or letters for the numbers.
And just to supplement, the Sky Full of Stars came out on March 16th. Deathwalker came out on April 20th. Just to let you know what's coming, we're not going to put out an episode every single week from March 16th to April 20th. When we reach broadcast gaps, we're going to go on a slower release schedule, but we're not going to just die for the entire space of time. So we would like to have a feedback special aired at some point during that month. But yes, you should write in feedback. So since we're recording this before you've heard anything, we don't know what kind of feedback's coming in. We're going to assume that y'all have been very interactive and that you've been saying lots of things about the show and that you have maybe flirted with me in private chats or something. And to do that, you should write comments at my website, johnreadscomics.com, which is one of the homes for the show. There's no H in John.
Another website home for the show is bureau42.com, where all of the podcasts I'm involved with are hosted. You can interact with us there. There's no point flirting with me. We're happily married on this end. So yes, send all your flirtations to John.
Flirting in itself is its own reward. But yes, you can also write reviews on your favorite podcatcher. It's easy for us to actively monitor Apple Podcasts because that's possibly still the most popular podcatcher out there. If you leave a review somewhere else and would like us to read it and recognize it on the air, just drop us a line somewhere and say, hey, I sent you a 17-star review over on Pods R Us. And we're like, okay, 17 stars, that sounds great. Until we find out it's 17 out of 37. And then it's like, oh, I thought they were better.
Yes. Another place to reach out is YouTube, because we do have a YouTube channel for the show where you will actually be able to see all the episodes. So as I edit them and upload them, we're uploading them to all of the servers, but YouTube will actually show you, hey, this episode is coming in advance, whereas most podcast servers don't do that. So you could, if you're following through YouTube, if that's the way you consume your podcast, you can subscribe there or get notified just for the ones you want or for the playlists that you want, because we are assembling them in playlists for people as well. And just thinking, something I probably should have mentioned during the show, the title of this episode is actually a reference to a Mark Twain short story. And there's a couple of Mark Twain short stories that were influential on Babylon 5. So it's entirely possible that some of these feedback gaps will be filled in with readings of Mark Twain, since his stuff is now in public domain in both Canada and the US, and I think the entire world. I think the longest copyright duration I found is in Mexico, which is life plus 100 years. So, when the author passes away, there's an additional 100 years before their work is in or falls into public domain. And since Mark Twain passed, or Samuel Clemens passed in 1910, that puts his work out there everywhere. So yes, we might hear the war prayer in the not too distant future, since it seems topical, and some of the other ones, reading these asked and answered. JMS has also said that the man who corrupted Hadleysburg was a big influence. So that one is a distinct possibility to be read as bonus episodes as well.
Yeah, the title of the war prayer I was kind of wondering about, because other than being vaguely applicable to the theme of the episode with violence, I wasn't entirely sure what the meaning of the title was.
Yeah, I'll probably read the whole thing. It's not super long, so it's like maybe a 10-minute thing. But the idea is that a country's gone to war and people are praying for Swiss decisive victory, and someone shows up saying, "Yeah, I'm a messenger from God. Let me finish your prayer with the second half, praying for the pain and suffering that will be bestowed upon their opponents." To kind of humanize both sides in the war.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which was published posthumously, because when he submitted for publication at the time, they said, no, this is too reactionary. Or not reactionary, but yeah, they basically said, oh, this is too far gone. You're going to upset people. And his friends said, yeah, you're going to upset people. He said, okay, fine, wait till I'm dead and then publish it. So it did eventually get published during World War I, when people were going, oh, okay, yeah, he has a point.
Alrighty.
All right, so John, do you want to let people know about the podcast they're about to hear about?
Yeah, so here in the Zocalo, we like to spotlight other podcasts that might be to your liking, and this particular one is one that I have been listening to since I found out about it, and I've got to be on. There's a 1980s comic series called Batman and the Outsiders, which is hosted by several members of the Right On Network, and they go through each issue of that comic series, and it's been a lot of fun to listen to. It's a comic series I had not read before, but 80s DC comics are a pretty great era, and Batman and the Outsiders is definitely something worth reading if you never have, or revisiting through the podcast if you have done so. So we're going to have a promo here for that show, which is called The Outcasters. And I guess that wraps us up for this week.
All right, so good eating to you.
And thank you for listening.
The Justice League wouldn't help him, so Batman formed a new team. They are the Outsiders.
We are the Outsiders.
Covering Mike W. Barr's series into its third year, where change is in the air. A new member joins, an original member leaves, old and new threats, and the deadliest man alive. Oh, and more puns. The Outcasters is a Batman and the Outsiders podcast. Look for us under the Right On Network. That's WRIGHT on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Or listen at our website, thehunterspodcast.com, and follow us on Twitter at BatOutcasters. Join the Outcasters, because to live outside the law, you must be honest.